Hello, dear writers. Today, finally, I am sharing my new world building method with you all. I really wanted to get this out in time for NaNoWriMo so that you had plenty of time to prepare, and I hope you find it useful. I'm Eva Deverell, in case you don't know. I run a popular writing website at eadeverell.com. I also teach online writing classes at the Lady Writers League, and I am the author of the Law of Attraction novel Alemia. So in today's demonstration, we are going to be building a fictional world together. If you're familiar with my other methods for plot development and character development, those are the one-page novel and the heroine frame, which I teach in my online writing courses, you will hopefully have an easier time understanding this method. It isn't difficult, but it's a bit more advanced, I think, than the other two methods. I like the idea that we're kind of building on the others. So if you haven't watched my previous video on how to plot your novel on one page, please check that out before you continue with this video. Just pause this one and come back to it, because I think understanding that method will really help you with this world building method. Like the other two methods, which I teach in my online courses, the one-page novel for plot development, how to be the heroine of your own story for character development, this framework, which I call the world building, original I know, but I think you'll see why in a second, this method also uses just one page. So the whole idea is that you get a nice one-page overview of your world. And world building is a very complicated subject. It can get really complex really fast, so I'm particularly happy with this method, and I found it very helpful in writing my own novel, which takes place on a fictional island. And I don't think I could have done it without the use of this method. This is the method I teach in my online course, How to Lose Yourself in a World of Your Own Invention. It's a really long title, and I usually refer to it as the World Building course, but if you are interested in taking it, it is currently available on pre-order. Pre-order is always the cheapest price that you can get my courses, and this is the final main course that I'm going to be releasing for a while, so if you're interested, please don't miss it. I've done plot development, character development. Now I've almost completed this course on world building. So for a time, I'm just going to be continuing to update these courses, develop them further, and I won't be releasing any new courses. So if you would like to get this course at the lowest price possible, please check out the pre-order. There will be links and more information below. Right, if you would like to follow along with me today, you are going to need a piece of paper, a straight edge, a pen or pencil, an eraser, and a pair of scissors. If you choose, it doesn't matter if you don't have this handy. So, we are going to start by folding our page into 16 rectangles. And we're going to do that by, I have an extra sheet just in case, and we're going to do that by folding our page twice along the long edge and then twice along the short edge. So if you have taken my course on character development and you know how to build a heroine frame, this should look very familiar to you. And of course with the one-page novel where we use 8 squares. Okay, so I folded it in half once. I'm going to fold it in half again. I'm just going to fold it to the middle, but it doesn't really matter how you do it. I've been working on developing this course and this method for several years now. The idea is that it integrates with my other two methods, so you can use them all in conjunction. And it's taken a while, but I am so happy with it. I think you're going to be as well. I really haven't come across anything at all similar to this. In fact, I haven't really looked into it, I suppose, but I haven't come across many courses on world building at all. Oops. So let's fold this as well. And there we go, we have our 16 rectangles. Unlike the other two methods, we are going to be using our page in portrait orientation. So it's going to be this way rather than landscape. Okay, have you caught up? So now what we're going to do is we're going to need our straight edge, and we're going to need our pen or pencil, and we want to draw our roof in. So we want to go from, actually I'm going to use a pencil so I don't get ink all over my tablecloth. Wouldn't that be nice? Here we are. So we're going to find the center point of our page, which is, let me mark it so you can see as well. It's right there. And then we're going to draw a line to the bottom, what is this, right corner of this rectangle here. And then we're going to do the same on this other side, right there. So you will see, I'm sure you've already guessed why, but this will form a little roof for us. Like so. Hopefully you can see that. Hang on, I'll go over it with a marker so you can see it easier. And I'm back. I decided to go over all of these lines so you could see them a bit easier, and hopefully now you can see that we have a world building, a little house with a roof, and there are 12 rooms down here, 8 of which we are going to be using in today's demonstration. So the first thing we're going to want to do is to create what I call the world poles. Those are, if you're familiar with the one-page novel, it's a bit like starting with the resolution and the stasis states, except that for the world building we don't need them to be polarity strictly, even though I call them world poles because I think it makes it easier to remember. But they can also be anything really that in your world you want to contrast or maybe even sort of polarize in a way. But we're going to be using these two outside columns as our world poles. So what we want to do is to find some sort of binary, some sort of duality that we can explore that sort of creates the space for our world. You know, you can think of it as maybe the poles of a tent that creates a space, or maybe the two poles of the world, the North Pole and the South Pole, with the mass of the Earth between them. That sort of thing. So hopefully that gives you some ideas. If you are using the one-page novel, you can use the resolution and the stasis states. Or if you're using the heroine frame also, you'll also have those. But they're usually more character-based. And you might want to create different resolution and stasis states for your character and then have separate world poles so that you just have more to work with. But it's up to you. You can absolutely use your resolution and stasis states here as well. So in order to decide on one for today's demonstration, I thought we could use the what is it called? The plot generator from the one-page novel. So I have my laptop here. Okay, so I'm in the advanced, what is it? No, I'm in the bonus materials section of the one-page novel course, and I'm going to click on the random plot generator and see what we come up with. We can actually start with an object as well, because what we're going to be doing is filling our world building, these 8 rooms here, which mirror the one-page novel. You'll see that in a minute. We're going to be filling them with objects. These 8 rooms, I think of them as rooms, I call them the world rooms. So they are basically the spaces into which we can place our objects. And if you're familiar with the idea of memory palaces, I think you'll understand why I decided to use this method in this way, apart from the fact that it mirrors the one-page novel as well. So, what has our plot generator given us? We have some nice objects. We have a leaf, a lifesaver, and a droid. We could use anything really. We could use our obstacles as well. We could use the wants, goals, needs. We even have some world resolution states that we can turn into their opposites. So what do we have? Rich, futuristic, or magical? Those are quite interesting. Occupations. I do like the idea of a leaf. Of course I do. Isn't that obvious? I'm sure you could have guessed that if you've followed me for any length of time. Both leaves in the sense of the leaves of the trees, and of course the leaves of a book are bound to interest me. We have rich. What else do we have for the character states? Controlled, wealthy, caring. Losses, sacrifices, a part of themselves, their life's ambition, justice. Locations, a small island. Doesn't that sound familiar? What should we do? A lifesaver is interesting as well. Yeah, it's useful at this stage actually to think about what sort of story we want to tell. Before I started this, I was kind of thinking of something like maybe a fantasy world, because I know you guys all love fantasy, and maybe something classical, maybe like some fantasy set in ancient Greece or ancient Rome, something like that. Does that sound interesting? I wish you guys could tell me. So along those lines, a droid is probably not the best choice. What else excites me? A landscaper, that sounds fun too. A landscaper, a fantasy landscaper in ancient Greece or ancient Rome. I like that idea. What about if we have landscape and portrait as our world poles? I think that's an interesting place to start. So I'm going to write them at the top of these columns. Actually, if we were going all the way with our demonstration, we would be drawing the beams across here. But I'm not going to bother with that today because that's kind of a bit more advanced, and we can do it if we get to it, but I would like to start simple. So I'm going to write, oh, shall I zoom you guys in? I'll zoom you in, hang on. Here we are, close up. So I'm going to write landscape for this world pole and portrait for the other one. How shall I write it, cursive or print? These are important considerations which you'll have to make for your own world building. I'm going to go with printing. Landscape. Beautifully written. And now I'm going to write portrait over here. Portrait. Right. Now, what we're going to do is very, very simple. We're going to take our world poles and we are going to turn them into the four corners of our world. So the two world poles are actually two of the corners themselves. And to create the other two for our remaining blank columns, all we're going to do is put not in front of the world poles. So for the portrait one, we're going to write it in here, and we're going to write not portrait. And for landscape, we're going to write it in this one so that there is always, a column between each of them. And we're going to write not landscape. If you're familiar with the idea of logic squares, semiotic squares, this should look quite familiar to you. If you continue with the course, you'll see that we use the roof beams as the intersections of these, just as you would in a semiotic square. And it also helps us with things like conflict. If we're using these as groups, for example, or whatever we're world building, it really doesn't matter. But so that's the basic idea. I think it's so exciting. I don't know if I'm just being geeky, but I hope it's exciting. So now our next task is going to be to fill our world rooms. Now, a few things. Let me zoom out a tiny bit so you can actually see all of them at once. There we go. A few things to know about the world rooms is we are going to be using them to store our objects, and they are going to act sort of like molds. So we're going to be able to place things inside these rooms that are then molded by the objects into whatever we want to world build. I know it sounds a bit weird, but I think it will get clearer. But I mentioned that these 8 world rooms mirror the one-page novel, and that's because these 4 are going to be upside down. So they will be sort of like the underworld in our one-page novel. So normally we would have, the resolution, the stasis, the trigger, the quest, the bolt, the shift, the defeat, and the power. Those are the 8 stages of the one-page novel. Again, if you don't remember all this, please check back to the other video I recorded with the plot demonstration. I think you'll find it really interesting. But so to help us decide, make more decisions, that's our purpose, right, with this, is that we can make more decisions easier because we have this this framework to help us. This isn't necessarily something that will do all the work for us. It's really just to help us think through things. It's really to help us see more at a glance, and to save time so that we don't have to keep hunting down information. So we have the basics here. And I'm going to label these, so the upper story and the lower story. We're going to ignore this bottom story for now because that's for later. I'm going to label these the internal rooms across here, and these are the external rooms. So that's just our starting point. You can think of them as, the world of adventure. That would be the bottom actually. The world of adventure, or the underworld, and the ordinary world up top. You can think of it as sort of heavenly and earthly, above stairs, below stairs, above ground, below ground. Any of those like dualities that you want to add onto this framework will work absolutely. And it doesn't matter what you label them, you can use them all in conjunction. It's, again, just a way to help you think. So this world building, we now have our skeleton in place. So we have our world poles, we have our 4 world corners, those include the world poles. We have the upper story and the lower story. That's the internal and the external stories of our world rooms, our 8 world rooms. This framework, I would like you to think of it as a miniaturized version of the world. So if you were to take the real world and you wanted to create a miniature representation of it, let's say you have a doll's house. Let's say this isn't a doll's house, but I have a cute little tin here, and it has some cute things that you might find in a house. It's got the levels and things. Let's say you wanted to represent the entire world in something tiny. You would need to make a lot of decisions. You would probably want to categorize the world in some way, and you would want maybe to choose representative objects to place inside this miniaturized version. This is something that 16th and 17th century intellectuals had a lot of fun with. They would create curiosity cabinets, cabinets of curiosities, and they would bring curiosities from the 4 corners of the world, and they would place them in these cabinets to represent the sum of world knowledge, all the arts, all the flora, the fauna, all those things. And the world building is kind of a similar idea. So what we want to do with this is we have this conceptual framework. We can't really go around and decide on all the categories we want to include. Even if we said flora, fauna, geography, history, whatever, that would still be a lot of categories, and it gets complicated very fast, and it involves making a lot of decisions. So we have more of a conceptual framework. It's more of an abstract map, if you will. And we create this framework based on the sort of story we want to tell. So we demarcate it, we delimit it, we create the boundaries so that we don't need to know every single thing. We just need to know the things that the story requires us to know. So if we're writing a story, that's set in ancient Greece, we know it's a fantasy, and we know that this maybe landscape and portrait, those are the main concepts that we want to be dealing with. So we've already limited our frame of reference, and that makes it a lot easier for us because we don't need to know every single thing. But it's going to help us discover more and more things within this limited framework. So that's the idea of the world building. I hope that makes sense. So now our next task is going to be to choose the representative objects for these concepts that we want to place in our world building. And I'm going to explain how to use them later on, but for starters, let's just think about what kind of object would represent an external aspect maybe of landscape. And let's stick to objects. So if we think of ourselves as creating a cabinet, let's think of placing objects inside it. Even though I call these the world figures, these 8 objects that we place inside the world rooms, I wouldn't recommend using human figures. I would think of them more as symbols, you know, that kind of figure, so that things that can be combined to create other things. So we want to create these objects that represent the world corners mixed with the external story and the internal story. And I want them to be objects, and I want them to be fairly small, you know, nothing too unwieldy. So what's a landscape external object? And you might need to think a bit laterally for this. The whole point of this world building exercise is that it really gives your imagination free rein. You know, it really taps into your imagination. And I think memory has a lot to do with that as well. And so does your knowledge of the world. And if you don't know something about the world, absolutely, this is the time to go and find out. I think that's what's really exciting about this method. It really teaches you more things about your own real world than it does about maybe the fictional world. But that's where the fiction comes from. So, what can we put in this first world room? I wish you guys could shout ideas at me, because that would be so much fun. I mean, if you can do this exercise with some friends, maybe with your classroom or something, I think that would be just so much fun, and I would envy you. Okay, landscape external, let me think. So it would be the appearance of a landscape, probably, you know, the outward appearance, rather than the inward aspect would maybe be more like thoughts, feelings, ideas, that kind of thing. So the outward appearance of a landscape, or it doesn't need to be just like a landscape in terms of nature. It could also be, you know, that's what really sparked this idea, was the idea of using the page in landscape orientation. And we also need to remember that we are thinking about a fantasy, ancient Greco-Roman world, if that helps. Something to do with the landscape and external, the aspect of a landscape, maybe a hill, so that you could get an overview of the landscape. I kind of like that idea. I'm going to note it down here. So I'm just going to write, oops, hill. There we go. So, let's do our world poles first, and then we'll tackle the knots, because that can get a bit knotty. And let's remember that we're going to be filling in our internal world rooms upside down, just like the one-page novel. You would be filling this in upside down as well. And that's kind of to remind you that they do sort of mirror each other. They can be used as the underworld, the internal, you know, the inward world, so that they are opposites. But you can think of it as the opposite of a hill, which would be a ditch, maybe. Or maybe, what about what's inside the hill? Maybe it's like a barrow, or a burial mound or something. So a tomb. What else can we call it? A tomb. Yeah, I think a tomb. Although that's not really an object, so a sarcophagus. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Let's put that in. a sarcophagus. So I'm going to go back to this world corner now, and I'm going to say portrait, external. So the external aspect of a portrait. I think that could actually just be a portrait painting hanging on the wall, or maybe actually painted on the wall, but then it's not an object. So let's make it an object. I'll make it a portrait painting on a what do you call it? Like a slab of wood or something, a piece of wood. But I'm just going to write painting. That's easier. We'll remember that it's a portrait painting. A painting. There we go. And then the internal aspect of a portrait. What could that be? A portrait. What's inside a portrait? Maybe. Again, it doesn't need to be an actual portrait of a person. It could be something in portrait orientation. Or we could say something like pigment, maybe. Maybe the pigment used in painting the painting. Yeah, I like that. Let's go with that. Pigment. And then let's think about our knots. So the negation of the world poles are sort of meant to help you think about the things that are not the thing, but that help define the thing. So, you know, it could be like the space around something, or the way that you know, I guess that would be a bad example if I said black and white define each other, or like darkness and light, because those are kind of polarities, whereas this is kind of the grey middle area. And that's the whole point of something like a semiotic square, is that it helps you define a word or a pair of words, and to explore the meaning that lies behind it, the connotations and not just the denotations. And I think that's really important for building a world as well, because we know that a dictionary doesn't tell us everything we need to know about the world or even about language. We know that there's a lot more beneath the surface. So this is what helps us uncover it. So let's think about an external representation of something that is not a portrait. So if we are going along with painting, and I haven't really gone into thinking about the fantasy aspect of this yet, but we can add that later. So the external representation of something that is not a portrait. Oh, and actually I should mention that it's usually better to stick to real world objects, at least if you are just starting out, because the idea is that we use things we already know, objects we are already familiar with, and that doesn't mean that you have to know everything about it, you know, but that you have some kind of familiarity with it, and that you can research it if you want to learn more about it. I do teach a basic framework for studying these in the course. I don't think we'll go over it in this demonstration because it's going to take a long time, but you know, any kind of way that you have of researching or delving deeper, observing the objects closer in the real world is going to help you when you come to represent them in your story, be it fantasy or historical fiction, or you know, contemporary fiction, whatever it is. Observation, deeper observation, closer observation is always going to help you with your writing. So let's go back to our objects. An external representation of something that is not a portrait. So what is not a portrait? A painting of a landscape is not a portrait. A painting of maybe a pet, you could consider it a portrait perhaps, but I'm thinking of those, you know, the Kawe Kanem paintings, the murals, or is it a mosaic? I think it might be a mosaic. A mosaic maybe could be something that is not a painting. So for not portrait, I am thinking something that isn't a painting, a portrait painting, Maybe it's a statue instead. Um, that would make sense. If it maybe it were a bust, let's put that. And let's say marble bust. A marble bust. And then let's do the internal object for not portrait. So what is not a portrait, but it's an internal representation? And remember, we can always think of the world of adventure, the underground, any other kind of internal aspect that we would also think of in the one-page novel. We can even think of what stage this would correlate to and kind of go from there. So something that is not a portrait and it's internal. And that could also be something that is within a character. That's one thing that the internal rooms really help us create, is the thoughts and feelings and opinions and all that kind of thing of characters, things that aren't necessarily evident on the outside. I am thinking of something like a de fixio, which was a kind of ancient curse that people would write on metal tablets and then throw down wells and things. So that's not a portrait, but it's kind of internal in the sense that it would be thrown down wells. I don't know if they would maybe be buried as well. And it's also kind of like an internal thing. A curse is, something. Yeah, I think it's something more internal. It's to do with people's feelings a lot. So I like that idea. So I'm going to put that down. Again, this is very much open to interpretation. There's no right or wrong way to fill this in. It's all just to get ideas flowing. So let's go back to not landscape and consider what an external object of a not landscape could be. So if it's not a landscape, oh, I realized that a hill isn't really an object. I think I was thinking of like a little model hill, like you would find on those little strategy trays and things. Does that work? I'm going to put hill model. Maybe it's like a train set. Anyway, not landscape, external. So if it's not a landscape, oh, I like the idea of an internal landscape as well. That's kind of like our imagination. External, not landscape. Shout ideas at me. I can't hear you. Leave them in the comments because I'm sure that some of you will come up with way better things than I have. And I think it would be so much fun to create like a story world all together. That would be super fun. Maybe something that is buried, the way that an ancient city might be buried by time. Perhaps you could argue that the inside of a house or something is not a landscape, but then I think we would maybe put that in the internal room. And also, the underground could also go in the internal room. And what would be an object to represent that? Maybe a floor plan. That's not exactly an object. How can we make it? So maybe a map, or like a floor plan on a piece of paper. I'm just going to put, I'm going to put floor plan, and we'll understand that it's on a sheet of paper. The word map actually, I believe, comes from the meaning of a napkin. So there we go, it's an object. And the external representation then of something that is not a landscape. What about like a star chart or something? That would also be kind of external and also, heavenly. So I'm going to write a star chart. They are kind of similar, and I think it would be better if we did try to find something a bit more different for our objects, but I think that's okay. So these are the 8 world figures, so the 8 objects in our world rooms. We have a model of a hill, we have a marble bust, we have a star chart, we have a painting, a portrait painting, and then in the internal rooms we have a pigment, and we should say maybe it's a jar of pigment or something of that kind. Let me put jar, just so it doesn't go all over the place. And we have a floor plan, again on a piece of paper, parchment, maybe it could even be on a wax tablet, something like that. We have a de fixio, and we have a sarcophagus. Now let's take these objects, these world figures, and let's create our world with them. And this is the stage at which our little spellbook comes in handy. This little spellbook comes with the course. You don't have to print it this small, you can print it you can print it A4, but I just thought this was really cute. And this helps us transmute the world figures, the objects that we have in our world rooms, into anything that we want to world build. So let's say we are writing along and we decide that we want a culture. We would decide which world room we want to put it in. We want to create it in, rather. So let's say that we want a culture that is obsessed with portrait painting. We would probably build them in this world room. And then we might think of the people or the internal aspects of the people maybe as being in the internal room. So if we wanted to create a single character in this world, we could place them here. On the other hand, maybe this character doesn't fit in with their world very well. We could choose to create them in the opposite corner. We could say that, you know, they are more interested in landscapes and the internal aspects of these landscapes. So the external is often useful for creating cultures, society, rules, that kind of thing, and then the internal we can often place our characters in. However, the idea of this framework is that it's incredibly mutable. So you can create characters in one world room, you can move them around to other world rooms, you can create a character at a particular point in time in one world room, and then you can maybe have a narrator who's in another room, and then you can have the perspective of them looking at a character in this world room, and that gives you so much more information than you would have had otherwise. In the course, we also use the acronym FIAT, that's forces, ideas, effects, and things. And we use that to study these objects. So you would normally have like a whole bunch of writing in here, and you could use all that information to further develop whatever you're world building. I really can't stress how much possibility lies within just this one page. And the nice thing about it is that you have an overview. You understand how these world rooms relate to each other. Once you have the roof in place, you have even more idea of how they can relate and what happens at the confluence of these 4 world corners. But even with this, you know, this basic structure, you can create more than one world. You can use each of these world corners as a separate world. You know, it could be a planet, it could be a family, it could be a culture. You can create cultures from groups of these. You can say, well, I want to take the 2 world corners and create a group, or you know, 3 of them or 2 of them, whatever you like. And the whole idea is that this world is holographic in nature. So every part has the information needed to build every other part and the whole as well. So if we take the information in a particular world room, we can then use that to generate, you know, this is one object. We can generate as many objects as we like. We can generate characters, we can generate groups of characters and create cultures with artifacts and locations, settings, entire worlds, planets, more than one planet, solar systems, whatever you like. You can use this information, especially if you use the fiats to study these objects, and then you combine them and use the little spells in your spell book, which we'll do in a minute. You have so much possibility at your fingertips. So let's consider creating a story using the one-page novel method. We can do that on the reverse because we still have a whole side free to create whatever we want. And let's see what we might need to create and how this little spellbook can help us. Okay, so let's turn our page like this, and then we can flip it over so that we have our roof pointing this way. And then we can write in the 8 stages of the one-page novel. We're going to be using 2 of these squares as the one-page novel, if you remember. So you can kind of ignore this line for now if you want. I'm going to write resolution. Stasis. Remember, the resolution is the end of the story. The stasis we create by flipping it into its opposite to create the beginning of the story, the state of the character at the beginning of the story. Then we have the trigger, then the quest, and then we turn our page around so it's upside down, and we have the bolt. Then we have the shift. That's kind of the paradigm shift, the turning point. Then we have the defeat. And finally, the power. Okay, so let's consider a character who inhabits this world so that we know exactly what we need to world build for this world, right? We need the story to tell us where to go. So let's choose a couple of stasis or resolution stasis states. So we already have a couple of states we can use in our one-page novel plot generator. So we had controlled, wealthy, and caring for the character's resolution states. I like the idea of controlled. That sounds interesting. So let's put controlled for the resolution. And remember, you would usually have, the more positive, maybe sounding state as the resolution, so that the character starts at a low point and then makes their way to a high point. You have an upward character arc. But in this case, we have controlled, which doesn't sound terribly great, as the resolution state, which is quite interesting. So if we turned it into its opposite, we would actually have free. So maybe we have a character who just suffers from too much freedom. Maybe they're an artist and they're just lost in all the possibilities. I think that's something we can relate to. So we have a character who is living in too much freedom, and at the end of the story they are controlled, perhaps by a patron or perhaps by something else. After the resolution and stasis, we plot the shift, which is the kind of midpoint between them. It's the point at which the character moves from the stasis into the resolution, or else sees their way to the resolution. So if they're moving from being free to being controlled, perhaps that's the point at which they accept guidance, they accept patronage. Yeah, I like that idea. So they maybe, this would be a point where those cheat sheets would be quite helpful. Should I bring those out? Yeah, I think I will. Hang on. Found them. I've had a lot of questions about these genre cheat sheets. You can get the generic cheat sheet in the coterie, but I'm afraid these genre-based cheat sheets, so the ones for fantasy and romance, mystery, and so on, these are exclusive to the one-page novel course. I just think it would be unfair on my students if I put them up for sale separately. I had no idea that they would be this popular before I made them exclusive to the course, so I'm so sorry, but if you are interested in them, you can get them in the bonus download section of the one-page novel course. I will put links below to help you out. Right, so we have the fantasy cheat sheet here, so we can use that. What else do I have? I have thriller and sci-fi. I don't know where the rest have gone, but let's use fantasy for now. Okay, so we've dealt with our resolution and stasis. Let's think of a scene idea for the shift. What should we say? A scene in which, what about this one? A scene in which Name discovers that the magical object isn't what it seems. Or we were saying actually that maybe they get a patron. A scene in which Name accepts the shadowy side of magic. Ooh, I kind of like that. A scene in which Name realizes that what has gone wrong with their world's magic. But let's choose, well, yeah, okay. Let's go with something that we can world build. A scene in which Name recognizes their part in the magical world. A scene in which Name must choose correctly between a true magical object and a false one. So that can be fun, and then we can world build our objects. So let's say, and let's give them a name. Let's say Marcus. That's a nice, simple Greco-Roman name, I think. Actually, Roman, I guess. Marcus has to choose correct magical object. And then we can create the magical object using one of our world runes. And we can also develop Marcus himself. So then we go back to the trigger, which is the kind of the first step that the character takes from their stasis state. What do we have for that? A scene in which Name is bestowed magical powers. A scene in which Name finds their way into a magical world. I think we did that last time, did we? A scene in which Name is forced or invited into a magical world. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I'm feeling like this is already a magical world. Although I think the idea of like an urban fantasy, ancient classical world, that would be exciting. If there's a story like that out there, please let me know so I can read it. A scene in which Name sets out to seek magical occupation to ask for their help in attaining their want, goal, need. See, that could be useful because then we can world build an occupation and some settings and stuff. So let's go with that one. So let's say Marcus, let's say M, sets out to seek magical, I probably didn't need to write that, occupation. I'll put that in caps so we remember that we want to world build that. And then we go on to the quest. So this is kind of the bulk of the story actually. This is where a plan is made that then kind of falls off the rails in the bolt. A scene in which Name travels to a magical location. Yeah, that's a good one. And then we can world build the location. So Marcus travels to location. Again, apologies for my awful handwriting. It's not normally this bad. I say that in every demonstration that I do. It's really not that bad. And then, so we've done the quest. Now we go to the opposite corner. Again, if this is confusing you, be sure to watch that plot demonstration that I did before because I explain it and I think I go slower. So the quest is kind of the opposite state of the power. So they mirror each other in a lot of ways. So if we have him doing like going to a magical location, then he would maybe go there again in the power, but he would get there faster and easier. So he can maybe revisit that. Revisits location faster and easier. Maybe he's found some amazing mode of transport. Yeah, I'm going to stick to just one scene per stage for this demonstration, just for the sake of getting this done a bit quicker. I know I'm already quite a ways into this video. And then what do? Then we do the bolt. So this is the stage that derails the quest. So a scene in which Name and allies are lost in a magical location and stray from or forget their quest. So his quest, actually we haven't discussed what his quest is, but we'll do that later. A scene, so let's world build him some allies. So Marcus and let's say friends. What did we say? Lost. Oh yeah, are lost in location. Lost. Let's say in that previous location that we talked about in the quest. And then finally we have the defeat. This is the stage at which there's like a sacrifice that's made, that needs to be made so that the character can go on to their resolution state. A scene in which the magical object is stolen. Perfect. Magical object is stolen. If I can read this afterwards, I will be very happy. Okay, so that gives us a few ideas to work with. I would probably take a bit more time on the plot if I were you, but just for the sake of demonstrating how to use the world building technique, let's work with this. And then let's go in the story order. So we would start with the stasis, trigger, quest, and then down here bolt, shift, defeat, power, and resolution. That's the story order. What we just did was now the plotting order. So let's go like that and world build the things that we need using our world building. So let's think about Marcus himself for a start, and how he's narrating the story. So I really like the idea of creating a narrator at a different point in time. It's not for every story, of course, but it's kind of a useful way to use the world building. So let's say Marcus is, where do we want to place him? He starts out with too much freedom. Where are we? Here. So he has too much freedom to begin with, and then he gets controlled in the resolution. So where would that place him? Let's think. We can create him in one of the internal rooms, and then maybe move him to the external as the story progresses. We can also follow, the way that let me zoom you out a bit. So the way that the one-page novel works. So if you imagine this is the stasis, and then we can go trigger, quest, and so on, and we can, move him through these rooms. I think that'll make more sense in a second when we go over how to transmute the world figures using, where's our tiny spellbook gone? Here it is. So we can use these spells, and the spells are actually questions and keywords that we can focus on. I printed this really tiny. I don't know if you can see anything, but we can use these to transmute these objects into whatever we need. So let's transmute one of these into Marcus. Marble bust does seem like an obvious choice for a character, doesn't it? But let's think of someone with too much freedom. Where would they be? Not in a sarcophagus, I don't think. Not in, what does that say? A floor plan. A star chart, maybe. Yeah, that seems like someone with too much freedom on their hands. So let's imagine Marcus is in this room, and we have a star chart, and we want to turn a star chart into a character. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but let's see how we can do it. So I'm going to choose a random spell. Let me just flick through these pages, and I'm going to choose this one. What is this? Combination, one of my favorites. So I'm going to, let me go for a random number. Is there an inherent hierarchy in this combination? So for combination, we actually need two things at least, right? To combine them. So let's consider combining the star chart with maybe the internal one, a floor plan. You can't see it again. There we go, floor plan. Floor plan, star chart. What else can we think about with those? A relationship between them. So one is above his head, and the other is below his feet. So he's kind of the mediator between them. A character who mediates. I like that. Let me note that down. So I'll note it down. I'll use these rectangles here to note them down. So I'll just say Marcus. So this is my world building information from Marcus, and I'm going to say he is a mediator. Maybe he's like a middleman, if he is a middleman in the art world or something. Middleman. So he buys art and then maybe he sells it on to rich, wealthy Romans or something. What else? So I'm looking at these keywords. We have merging. So if we merge a star chart with a floor plan, what do we get? Maybe like a mosaic on the floor that depicts the stars, maybe the gods in Olympus, something like that. So maybe he is someone who is who's kind of blasphemous. Maybe he doesn't respect the gods. Maybe he tramples on them. So let's say that. Let's say blasphemous. Oops. Blasphemous. So he doesn't believe in the power of the gods and the power of the stars. Maybe he's proved wrong. I don't know. And let's choose one more. Let's go for another question. How does the combination of objects differ from a single object? So the combination, let's say, of the star chart and the floor plan, how is that different from the star chart itself or the floor plan alone? If you combine them, and we said they were maybe like a mosaic on the floor, how is that different to, for example, the stars themselves? Well, it's a representation. It's smaller. Yeah, I like that. Let's say small. So maybe he's small-minded, or maybe he's actually physically small. Where are we? There we go. So we can use the floor plan as more his thoughts and feelings, his mind, and we can use the star chart for the external, so his appearance, or maybe his higher self. These are all possibilities that are very productive of ideas. Yeah, but I think that gives us, a vague idea of what Marcus is like. He's a mediator, he's a middleman, he's blasphemous, he doesn't believe in the power of the gods or the fates or the stars or whatever, and he is small, whether small-minded or small in stature. And then let's move on. What did we have? On occupation. So he goes out to seek someone with a magical occupation. We don't need to really think about why at this point. That can come later. So let me choose another spell to perform, to cast upon this occupation. Hopefully not the same one. Let me see. I'm going to go for, that's a blank page. I'm going to go for this one. This last one is fire. So what do we have here? What are we doing? Occupation. Which object might control fire? Oh, that's interesting. So someone who controls fire, maybe? Who would that be? Let me say occupation. That's what I'm world building. I'll just note it down here. Who controls fire? I don't know. Maybe a blacksmith. Maybe Hephaestus. Vulcan. Yeah. So he goes to see Hephaestus or Vulcan. Should I use Roman? It is Vulcan, right? I hope I'm not getting that wrong. Let's say he goes to see the blacksmith god. Well, that was kind of easy, but let's build him up a bit more. So what do we have in the keywords? We have fever. Oh, what if he's ill? What if Vulcan is ill? That would be interesting. Consumption. Yeah, maybe he has consumption. What about questions? Who or what does this object fire up? He fires up his forge, maybe. I'm not sure that's very helpful, but it's a start. We can always go go back and build more when we have need of it. Although let's think about which world room Vulcan would be in as well. Maybe he would be on the hill, right? I mean, we said it's a model hill, but we're going to transform it into a mountain. He would be on Olympus. I'm pretty sure he lives on Olympus. And how could we transform that by fire? What happens if fire is a missing force? Oh, we haven't covered those. But still, missing force in this object's world room, but not the others. Ooh, so what if a Vulcan is missing fire, whereas everywhere else has it? So maybe he can't get his forge working. I'm not sure what the implications of that are or the connotations, but let's put it in anyway. And maybe for whatever reason, Marcus is tasked with seeking him out, helping him. Missing fire. I don't know. Is it Prometheus again? Is he up to no good? Let's see. For the quest, we want to create a location. So let's note that down there. And this is also, we're moving Marcus now through the world rooms, right? So his point of view is going to change. So if he starts out here, and let's say we're taking him here to Olympus, he can kind of maybe remain here in mind, and he can be looking out on this, and we can, explore how he doesn't really understand it, how it's so far away from everything he knows, from his small-minded, small stature, maybe, especially compared to the gods, I would imagine, how his outlook is shaped by that. So let's consider that. So we want a location, and if we're building Olympus, what's Olympus going to look like? Well, let's find out. Let's see. I'm going to go with this bottom one this time. That is taste. Oh, that's interesting. So we have a hill that we want to transform by taste. To transmute an object through taste, you can ask, let's see, how else could this object taste? Oh, what if we're thinking about nectar and how it would taste to a mortal? Maybe he doesn't like it. That would be funny. If nectar, let's say they have nectar, and it tastes bad. It tastes bad to Marcus. That's an interesting detail. It's maybe a bit silly and a bit quirky, but still viable, usable. We have seasoning and enjoyment. So maybe he doesn't enjoy it. Maybe he thinks it needs to be sweeter. He wants it to be sweeter. What else? Taste. We can also think of the way taste also means, discernment. How tasteful is Olympus, or how tasteless is Marcus, perhaps. We can think about his being in this kind of mindset. He's on the floor basically, and he is looking up at Olympus, at the gods, and what kind of, what would show his tastelessness, perhaps. Maybe if we were to transmute the floor plan into something that is tasteless, what would that be? Maybe it would just be like dirt, like just dust, something like that. So he tastes, or maybe the gods think he is dusty. That would be an interesting detail. The gods think M is dusty. Maybe they want to purify him in some way. What else? Let's have one more detail and then we'll move on. How is the taste detected? That's kind of especially important if you are creating things other than humans. So we usually taste with our tongue and to a certain extent with our nose. But if you were creating another creature, for example, in a fantasy world, um, what kind of organs might they have to be able to taste things? Mm, who has never tasted this object? Oh, I should mention that object is basically the thing that we're world building, so we can substitute whatever we are world building for object. So in this case, um, we can talk about the hill or the floor plan. So this world, the world figure, or we can also, we don't have to apply it to the world figure. We can apply it to other objects or other elements and transmute those as well. So it's sort of, it keeps layering on top of each other. We start with the world figures, but then we can transmute the things we create using those world figures into other things. So it just keeps snowballing, and we create more and more amazing world building information that then also is congruous with each other because they're all built from the same basic elements. So what did we say? Who has never tasted Olympus? Maybe. Obviously Marcus probably hasn't, or maybe he has. That's interesting. Maybe he has, and he's been there before. It sort of depends on the story we want to tell, how difficult we want to make it for him, whether that is his trial, getting to Olympus, or whether his trial is something else. I think perhaps it's something else. So we can say he's been there before, but maybe he takes along someone else who has never tasted the delights of Olympus. So maybe, what about his wife? Maybe he takes his wife. So M's wife, first time in Olympus. On Olympus? In Olympus? Anyway, moving along. For the bolt, we have the location, but we wanted to world build his friends. So maybe let's consider his wife. What sort of a person is she? Let's put our, what has happened? Oh, here we go. So let's say his wife, and what should we call her? Lydia. So her name is Lydia, and where should we world build her? Maybe she is a rather more, let's say, sensitive character than Marcus is. Maybe she enjoys painting. Maybe she has a marble bust. Where should we put her? We have Marcus here. So both of these are quite close to Marcus, and that kind of makes sense if they are man and wife and their relationship is reasonable. What is that? I can't read my writing. A pigment jar, a jar of pigment. That's interesting. Maybe we can use that. And she's kind of maybe she's more inward looking. She's more introverted maybe than Marcus is. So how do we transmute a pigment jar into a wife, a secondary character? Oh, spellbook, show us the way. I'm going to go with this one. What is this? Air. Okay, what happens if air is an added force in this object? In the pigment jar, if we add air to the pigment jar, it's going to fly all over the place. So maybe she is someone who's very colorful. That would be fun. We're on this side now. So can you see that? There we go. Lydia, let's say she is a colorful person. Maybe she has a colorful personality as well. Maybe she's very buoyant, light-hearted. She's happy and bubbly, maybe. What if this object were to vanish? Maybe his wife vanishes? That would explain how they get lost there. She vanishes. Did someone abduct her? Does Vulcan take a liking to her? Does one of the other gods or goddesses take a liking to her? Who knows? Vanishes. Are you enjoying this story? I wasn't really imagining this when I started, but It's kind of interesting. What else have we got? Atmosphere. That's interesting. A pigment jar in the atmosphere. What if it's not in the atmosphere? What if it's in space? Is Olympus in space? A pigment jar. Maybe it's floating for some reason. Maybe she's she feels out of place. That could be a way of expressing it. She feels out of place. And maybe Marcus isn't helping her as much because he's used to Olympus. He's been there loads of times. What other questions do we have? How could this object symbolize air? So air is something that is vital. And how is Lydia vital to Marcus? Or how is the pigment jar vital to Marcus? Maybe he sells pigments. Maybe because pigments are very earthly things, right? So maybe the gods do need humans to bring them up pigment. Maybe they don't find it on Olympus. Or maybe they have different pigments. Maybe they have the earth tones they bring from Earth because they believe that they're richer. I like that idea. So maybe Lydia's the one who really has the taste. You know, she understands pigments better than he does. And so maybe she is the, what would you say, the skillful one? Skillful with color, maybe, with pigments. And what did we say? Oh yeah, the gods. Yeah, we can mention that as well. So pigments. Let's say earth tones sought out by gods. Sought after by the gods. I like that. Okay, and then the shift. What did we have here? Marcus has to choose the correct magical object. So what's our magical object? Let's choose one of these objects and make it magical. Deifixio is already kind of magical. A star chart, a sarcophagus, a marble bust, a painting. Which one should we make magical? I wish I could just have a poll up here and you could just pick. Which one are you going for? Are you going this way? Painting? Or are you veering off under here? What about star chart? Yeah? No? Yeah, I like star chart, even though we've kind of used it already. Okay, so let's go for a marble bust because we haven't used that. So a magical marble bust, and wrong way. And Marcus has to choose the correct one. What makes it correct though? Maybe it has something in it. Who wants him to choose as well? Maybe he has to choose the right one to save his wife, who is abducted, lost, trapped somewhere. We don't know. But I guess the gods are angry with him. Or maybe they're just having fun. I don't know. He has to choose the correct magical bust. Let's think about this bust and let's transform it so that we know what we're working with. Let's cast a little magical spell on it. Okay. Are you enjoying these spells? I really hope so. I've been working on this little booklet for the last couple of days and I really like it. I'm going to go on the, is there something? No, that's a note page. Cute little note page. Let me go with the first page. Where is it? Oh, it's upside down. Specificity, that's a good one. Substitution, let's try substitution. So what have we got? How would substituting a fiat for a different one change this object? So a force, idea, effect, or thing. We haven't really listed the fiats though, so that's not very helpful. What could be substituted for something else in the overall shape of this object? Ah, interesting. So we have a bust, and what would a bust have? It would have maybe, the physical features of the face. It would have maybe a gown or something, depends if it's a man or a woman, I guess. It would have hair. Oh, what if instead of hair it has something else, like a hat or something more magical? Maybe it has fire instead of hair. That's interesting. Ooh, okay. So bust, let's say it's of a woman, and it has fire for hair. I don't know where that's going, but it looks cool, right? What else have we got? What happens to this object or the part that is substituted out? Oh, so where is the hair? Where did that go? What happens to this object or the part that is substituted out? Ooh, where does it go? Where is the hair? Oh, maybe it's on Lydia. Hair on Lydia. That's weird. Did she turn into a bust? I don't know. What keywords do we have? Temporary. Well, that's good to know. Repair. Oh, maybe Vulcan was repairing the bust and it suddenly burst into flames. That's interesting. I don't know if he really goes in for marble though. He's more a metal worker, I would imagine. So maybe it was someone else. Let's say repair work, anyway. Repair work. And something went wrong. Maybe it was being painted. That's possible. And then what was the... Oh yeah, so that's like the magical object that he has to choose between. But maybe he has to choose between the object and his wife. I would hope that wouldn't be a difficult choice, but who knows? I don't know. We could go somewhere with that. The magical object is stolen, so the bust is stolen. Does he steal it? Oh, Marcus. What should we world build there? Maybe who steals it? Maybe a thief? Or maybe instead of making it a person, let's make it a creature so that we get to have a bit of fun with it. So let's say a thief creature. And let's choose another world room to build that in. Or maybe let's use the De Fixio. So it's kind of like the counterpart of the marble bust. And let's choose another spell. So we get to see as many of these as possible. What about touch? Okay. How is the touch detected? So yeah, we talked about this before. So, maybe they have a special touch organ. So it's not a human. What should it be? Some kind of bird? What are they stealing? A marble bust? Or the hair off a marble bust? And they're leaving fire in their wake? Like a phoenix maybe, something like that? Or something a bit weirder. What do they use to touch with? Ooh. Shout out some ideas. I'm thinking a beak, a trunk, something a bit stranger, like a feeler of some type. Maybe someone else's finger. Is that too weird? Yeah, maybe they just steal organs, but external organs or limbs or something. That is very odd and rather terrifying, actually. But then the De Fixio, it kind of goes with that, right? Because it's kind of a scary thing. They look very sort of ugly and horrible. I don't know if that's because they've been rusting for millennia, but So we're thinking of like a metal tablet with writing on it, and how to turn that into a creature that's a thief. If that doesn't tax your imagination, I don't know what will. Let's think. Metal. So maybe the creature is made of metal. I like that idea. So it's made of metal. I like the idea of a beak as well, like a conical beak. You know, as if the Defixio has been rolled into a cone. Conical beak. I am never going to be able to read that again. I'll have to watch this video. What else have we got for the touch? What else feels similar to this object? So like a metal plate, what else feels similar to it? Maybe a plaque of some kind. That would be in you know, our world. Yeah, some kind of metal plate. Oh yeah, maybe like an actual plate to eat off. And how do we turn that into an aspect of our creature? Maybe they actually sit on metal plates, or they land on them. Maybe they're attracted to them in some way. Let's try that. Attracted to metal plates. Maybe that's what they use to rejuvenate, to repair themselves or something. This is very weird. And then maybe how do they move? Let's think about that. Actually, we have some movement spells that we can use over here. What's causing this object to move is something powering or fueling it. That's interesting. So who is behind it? I don't know who would be behind it. We will have to think of that. Maybe it's Vulcan himself. If it's made of metal, maybe he's their creator. Vulcan is the creator? Is this a plot twist? It kind of sounds like one. Impetus, rhythm. Oh, maybe they have kind of a rhythmic waddle. I don't know. I'm thinking of them as maybe birds with metal wings. That would look quite cool. So maybe Daedalus. Is that his name? Yeah, maybe Daedalus helped build them, because he's the one who built them the wings and tried to fly with Icarus, right? So yeah, I'm gonna go with wings, like a bird-like. Cool. Well, that's kind of weird and wonderful. And then finally, let's build a location. Oh, not finally, we've got the resolution yet. But ultimately, let's create a location. Oh, actually, we've already created this location, but let's do this fun trick. So the location we had was Olympus, right? So we have all this detail about it. But we have moved, hopefully by this time, our character has moved through the world rooms, through the story enough that they are somewhat changed. So at the power, they will have a different view of this location than they did when they were in the quest. So let's think about that. We were building that location in this world room, right? So that kind of stayed the same, but Marcus has changed. So he started out here, and maybe he has moved this way, or it's possible that he has moved this way, and maybe we have a fall arc instead of an improvement arc. So, you know, we said he starts out free, and then he is controlled. So yeah, maybe he angers the gods and he ends up as a permanent resident on Olympus, although that sounds rather good. So maybe he goes to Hades instead. I don't know. We'll think about it. So if we have Olympus here, And although he's been there before, so he already has some idea of it, but maybe he has changed even now by losing his wife. Maybe that's changed him. So maybe he's moved even further away from it. Maybe he's moved near his wife. So she was in this room, so she was represented by a pigment jar. And let's think about that. So we have Marcus here looking at Olympus here, so he's even further from it perhaps. And let's create or recreate Olympus from that viewpoint with another spell. Let's see. We have addition. To transmute an object by addition, you can ask, what additional function could this object perform? So the pigment jar. Maybe it can hold something else. Where are we? So we are on Olympus, and let's imagine that the pigment jar is performing an additional function. So maybe it's holding something else. Maybe his wife is trapped inside it. Wife trapped in pigment jar. Yeah, this is definitely not looking like it's going to have a happy ending. And what else? So that changes his viewpoint dramatically, I would say. So maybe he used to look up to the gods, even though he was kind of tasteless and he didn't really know what was what. But now he probably despises them because they have imprisoned his wife. So how else can we portray that dislike of the gods? Let's see. Who welcomes the addition? Who doesn't? So, I don't know, actually. We would have to, I think, develop the other gods a bit more to consider that. But obviously, I don't think his wife would welcome it, and I don't think Marcus himself would welcome it. How does the addition contribute to this object? So the addition of his wife to the jar and also to Olympus. Maybe they put her in some sort of still life arrangement. That sounds terrible. How does it contribute to this object? Well, where does the pigment go then? That's a question. And I guess he would have lost his job if they're not going to buy pigment off him anymore, if that's what he is. He's, a middleman for selling pigment from Earth to Olympus. But what about, what else can we say? Incongruous. Yeah, I think the jar would probably look incongruous. It's quite, I would imagine, a small jar. And I would imagine everything on Olympus is quite large. Overflow. Yeah, how does she fit in there? Some kind of magic. And yeah, how else has it changed for him? How has Olympus changed for him? We said that he gets there faster and easier. So we haven't talked about his mode of travel. Maybe that would be something interesting to consider. Let's do that. Travel. Let's use subtraction for that. What happens to the subtracted part? So if we're talking about it being faster and easier, then time is subtracted. So he has some extra time because he's traveled faster. What does he do with that time? Maybe he spends it complaining or crying to maybe Hera, crying and mourning his wife. Maybe he tries to talk to her, like Isabella in the pot of basil, something like that. What happens, or who wishes to take away from this object? So he does, but maybe someone else does as well. And we have to remember that this is the power, so this is when he finds the power within himself to do something. But then if he is going to ultimately fail, then he won't find that power. So we'd have to make a decision. We do end them all well, so I think maybe it's time for a story to end badly. Unfortunately for Marcus and his wife. Although perhaps, maybe his wife is saved by one of the gods and lives happily ever after on Olympus. I mean, she is a colourful, cheerful person. Maybe the gods like her. What could be taken away from the overall shape of this object? The shape of the object. Maybe it has a label on it that they could switch out. Although I guess we don't have to use the same thing for travel. Let's choose another object for travel. What have we got left that we haven't used? The sarcophagus. Oh, that's an interesting mode of travel. A magical sarcophagus. Should we use subtraction for that as well? What could be taken away from the overall shape of the sarcophagus for it to be a mode of transport? Maybe the lid? Or maybe the body inside. I think that would be helpful. So it's like an empty sarcophagus, or maybe it's like steps down into the sarcophagus. So even though Olympus you would think of as being high up, maybe it's actually underground, or maybe the way to it is underground. So the way is underground. And then how does he actually travel along it? Does he walk, or what else can he do? What haven't we used? How does the subtraction help define this object? So the subtraction of the floor, perhaps? How does it define it? Well, it becomes a portal, right? So maybe it just whisks him off, or maybe he has to have some help. How else can you travel a long distance? Or maybe it isn't a long distance. Maybe it's just right there. Let's try another spell and see what we come up with. Let's try, we haven't done one of the seasons. Let's try a season. Let's have autumn. How does this object herald autumn? How does a sarcophagus herald autumn? Well, it's kind of to do with slowing down, with dying, with harvest, maybe. What other words have we got? Leaves. It has to do with leaving, with the start of the academic year, a festival. Maybe it's only during certain dates in autumn that he can travel. That's interesting. I can't remember the Roman festivals, but one of those. Only on festivals. So yeah, that gives us an idea of how he might travel to Olympus, or maybe Hades, I don't know. And then finally we have the resolution, when he is controlled. What can we world build here? Maybe his home world, because we usually think of the top 4 stages as the ordinary world. We said the same is true with the world rooms because they kind of mirror each other in the same way. So maybe Marcus has to return home on his own, and he has to wait maybe for the next year's festival to go back and save his wife. So let's do this. Home. What is this home like? So it's probably going to be as unlike Olympus as possible. But also he lives there. So why don't we combine, actually, let's do the external. Let's combine painting and star chart. So maybe he actually has quite a lavish house, quite a pretty house. We did mention that he maybe had a mosaic of the stars under his feet on the floor. So let's put that down. Star, mosaic, floor. And he has to spend a year walking around this and pacing and thinking what he did wrong. Let's look at our spells. What else haven't we used? Division. That sounds appropriate because he's divided from his wife. Who might want to divide this object into pieces? Who might want to keep it together? So the gods want to divide them, I guess. So now he believes in destiny, right? We said we would, oh no, these two, star chart and painting. Dividing a painting, well, that makes sense as a mosaic. Who would want to, so maybe he destroys it. He's so angry that he destroys it or has it destroyed. So he has to live in a house with just a crumbled up floor, like a ruin. What else have we got? Allocation. I don't know what to make of that. Border. That's interesting. So maybe the sarcophagus is in his house, and he just always comes up against this limit of where he can go. So at other times when the festival isn't taking place, it's just a regular sarcophagus. So he maybe just sits there being sad. Oh dear, I hope you don't hate the story. How easy is it to divide this object? So the painting from the star chart, for example, maybe it starts to chip away. Maybe he isn't maintaining it. Maybe it isn't even every autumn that the sarcophagus allows him to pass, but several years. It's not every year. So the whole house starts to disintegrate. And the star chart, what if that starts to fall apart? Maybe his business starts to crumble as well. Business starts to fail. And then we have to think about how he's controlled as well. I guess, his destiny in a way controls him because this is what the gods have set out for him. What else? What parts of this object are indivisible? So maybe his bond with his wife is indivisible, and maybe there's something in there that keeps him remembering her in some way. So maybe the colors. Maybe the colors stay. Or maybe he just keeps the pigment that he's collected in the jar, and that reminds him of his wife. So maybe his pigment collection. Maybe he continues to collect pigments and remembers her. Remembering wife. But yeah, I think that gives us a good idea of how to world build all of these elements. Do you like this story? I really enjoyed it, actually. I think it's fun. So I know Marcus didn't have a very happy ending, or his wife, unless, they let her out and she can live on Olympus. But, it doesn't necessarily mean that his story is over. This is maybe just part of his story, and afterwards maybe he does return to Olympus and maybe he's reunited with his wife. I don't know. What do you think? How would you end the story? So that concludes our demonstration for this world building method. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful. I really enjoyed this story. I don't know if I will ever write it. If you feel like writing it, please do, and please send me a copy so I can read it and share it with everyone else. But that is the basic idea of how we can use the world building to create a story and to world build all of the elements that we need. And I think you can get a sense of how they all cohere together, how they all relate to each other. And there's a lot more to the method than I've been able to cover in this demonstration, but I've already eaten through 2 SD cards and it's been hours and hours that I've been filming this, so I'm sorry I can't cover more. But again, if you're interested in taking the full course, it's called How to Lose Yourself in a World of Your Own Invention. It's a very long title, but it's at a very small price at the moment, so if you do want to take the course, please check out the links below. Grab it when it's on pre-order. The main recordings, the audio recordings, will already be there for you, and if you're watching this at a slightly later date, there may even be more material available for you. You'll be able to work through the basic method in more detail than I've been able to cover here. You'll have access to this cute little spell book that you can download and use whenever you need, and you'll also have the benefit of all the library and everything else that is provided in the Lady Writers League. One last thing we can do with our world building is to open up the windows. That's why we had our scissors. So let's do that. So to do that, we are going to want to fold our page in half along the long edge. So we have it like this, and we are going to I need to think about it. We're going to cut along this line here, but we're not going to go up into the roof. Okay, so we're just going to cut here. So we cut both sides of the page like so. Okay, and then we're going to open it up. You can see we have our slit in the page here. We are going to now fold it in half along the short edge, like so. And now we're going to make 3 cuts. So we're going to cut here, we're going to cut here, and here. Again, not going beyond this line. So like this, and second cut, and the third cut. And then we are going to open up our world building again, and you will see that we have windows, like so. Now, if you were using the heroine frame, then these would be the rectangles where you would have your secondary characters. So you could actually kind of bring them into your world building and consider which world corners maybe you would like to fit them into, which world rooms you would like to create them in. So that can be kind of handy. But another thing we can do is we can fold it into a little booklet. So to do that, we are going to fold the roof back like so, and we're going to fold this like so, and then we're going to fold that in half, and then we're kind of going to make a little hole like this, push it together, and then it sort of depends which page you would like as the front. You can choose whichever one you want, and then fold it around. And then you have a little booklet that's just a bit easier to tuck into places than it's this way around, sorry. It's just a bit easier to tuck into, you know, your pocket or into your notebook. You can just attach it with a paper clip, and you'll see that you have the world building that we did, and you'll also have these are the world rooms. So if you had your fiats listed in here, you would be able to just page through these as well. And you can create a little booklet, like so. And you can also, if you undo this, you can still, oh, there we go. You can still also fold this into the one-page novel as well. So you would go like so, and then you would have your stasis going this way, that one going that way, and then you fold it under like so, and then like so. So now you have your one-page novel in plotting order. So you have the stasis, the trigger, the quest, the bolt shift, the defeat, the power, and finally the last page, the resolution. So I hope you enjoyed that. Here is, for reference, my one-page novel, my world building for my novel Alemia. You can see it has a lot more writing on it, but it's in pencil, so it's a bit difficult to read. But This is the framework that helped me write this novel. If you're interested in this novel, please do check it out. I will have links below. It's kind of a sweet little story about a 7-year-old girl who goes to holiday on the island of Alemia and the changes she undergoes there. But that is Alemia, that is the world building, that is the method that we use in how to lose yourself in a world of your own invention. I hope this has been helpful. If you are taking part in NaNoWriMo, I hope it gives you enough time to prepare your world building, and then as you're writing, I hope you will be able to reference it and it will help you world build all the elements that you need. Again, please, if you are interested in the course, don't pass up this chance. It will never be as cheap as it is currently. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this helpful, please share it with friends, family, any other writers that you know. And if you have any requests for other demonstrations that you would like me to do, please let me know. Give me some ideas and I will do my best to record them for you. Thank you and happy writing.